As usual, I have to be the bearer of bad news, and that is that you're just simply not good enough to make the PGA Tour. And right after this, we're going to look at some of the specific reasons or the specific differences between a PGA Tour professional and a typical golfer, or even a pretty good golfer. So stay with me. Hey, this is Steve from HitItLonger.com, and I'm on a journey to hit longer and straighter tee shots, longer, straighter shots in general. And if that's your journey too, you might think about hitting the subscribe button, and that way you'll get notification of all my videos to come. In today's video, we're talking about some of the major differences between you, maybe a typical golfer, maybe you're a better than average golfer, maybe you're a really good golfer, but there's going to be some major differences between yourself and someone you might see on TV, like a Rory McIlroy or a Brooks Koepka or a Dustin Johnson. So let's look at some of those differences. Okay, the first major difference that you'll find between a typical golfer and a PGA golfer is in the grip, especially in the left hand. You're going to see that a PGA Tour golfer will have taken a lot more time and care into their grip. They'll have practiced it on a daily basis, which is, it's not hard to do. Sure, you can hit a lot of balls with a good grip, but you can practice this at home as well, just even sitting on the sofa, just having a club handy, and you can just practice gripping it every single day for a couple of minutes. It's not difficult. Here are the major differences. I'll move a little bit closer here. One major difference is where the typical golfer will run their thumb, which will be at about 12 o'clock or running straight down the top of the grip. Well, the PGA golfer, you will generally not see them outside of somebody like Ben Hogan. You will not see them with the thumb at 12, but instead at 1. And in some cases, there might be some golfers in the Hall of Fame that were actually at 2 o'clock. Think of a David Duval or a Paul Azinger, somebody with a very strong grip. It's more likely that you see a strong grip on TV than you would see a weak grip. A second major factor about the grip that's different is a typical golfer might run the club a little more diagonally across the palm, like this. And then there's the 12 o'clock again. Well, you're not going to find too many golfers on TV that don't run the grip down more into the fingers. They'll be running it across this first pad of the pinky and slightly at an angle up into the second pad of the index finger, like this, and then gripping over the top. You'll see that I'm here at a 1 o'clock grip. My right hand is just simply going to match. Now I use an overlapping grip. I try to steer people away. I'm not a big advocate of the interlocking grip because a lot of people don't have long enough fingers and it curtails their release. A 10-finger grip I'm fine with. But I'd say most golfers on TV you'll see will have an overlapping grip like that. My right hand is simply just matching up with the left, with the crease or the V of both hands pointing between my shoulder and my ear. The third difference between the typical golfer and a pro you might see on TV is in the suppleness. Whereas the average golfer will squeeze from the shoulder down and be much tenser, and therefore they will be slower because muscle that is frozen or contracted tends to be slower than a muscle that is loose and free. So let's work on that grip pressure a little bit. Get it extremely light. You want to grip the club so lightly that the club head starts to feel heavy, free, back and forth, just like that. So let's move on for the grip and examine some of the other areas of the swing that are different between the typical golfer and a pro you'd see on TV. The setup is another area where the typical golfer can get a lot of improvement on, and it's not all that hard. You just have to practice it a couple minutes a day. The main difference that I see, the golfer on TV is typically going to get down to the ground by bowing at the hips this way. So you'll see their tush sticking out a little bit more. They'll look something like this. And you'll rarely ever see them standing too far from the ball. With the typical golfer or an amateur golfer, the two big differences in the setup that I see, they're going to get down to the ground more with more of a vertical spine and more knee bend. Something like this. You'll also tend to see the average golfer reaching way too far out for it. Something like this. That's the typical setup for the golfers that I see. There's one more key difference in the setup between a PGA Tour golfer and an average golfer. The average golfer tends to set up with their shoulder line pointing to the left, like this. Whereas a golfer on TV will have worked very hard to make sure their feet, their hips, and their shoulders are all parallel to their intended line of flight. I think I'm pretty close here. So between the grip and the setup, you can get a lot of work done more towards looking like a golfer on TV, and I think you're going to see an upgrade in performance as well. Now moving into the backswing, there's a huge difference between the average, let's say, bogey golfer. Maybe you're much better than that. Maybe you're a 6 handicap or a 9 handicap. But typically, the average golfer on the backswing is going to lift the club up with the primary power source of the arms. Like this. There won't be a lot of lower body action. There won't be a lot of torso turn. But instead, an arm lift, typically too straight. Not enough at a curve. In some cases, the better golfer might even draw the club too far to the inside. This is again because the arms are tending to supply most of the power rather than getting the primary source of power in the big muscles of the body. So someone on TV, you might see them once they're set up this way. They're going to swing the club head in a really precise arc to the inside and low back from the ball. And see, I'm doing this by slowly winding my torso and shifting my weight. So my arms are hardly supplying any power at all, nor are my wrists starting to break in maybe the first 24 to 30 inches of the swing. So the big difference there is that the takeaway in the backswing, with a golfer from TV, they will probably dominate that with all the big muscles of their back and their legs and their hips, and all that will be doing the lifting rather than just moving the arms. Okay, moving towards the top of the swing, the big difference between a pro and an amateur will be a couple things. First, the amateur will tend to swing shorter and narrower. Let's look at it from this angle. Shorter and narrower this way. Also, typically, they will tend not to be able to get all the way to a 90-degree wrist cock. Whereas somebody on TV would make, because they are not lifting their arms, they'll make a wider, longer backswing and cock their wrists at least to 90 degrees. In some cases, you might see them turn past 90 degrees with the shoulder turn and cock the wrists past 90 degrees as well, giving them a very healthy length backswing and a lot of power. Moving into the transition, one major difference between a pro and an amateur is that a pro will stay on an even tempo, and a 1 and a 2, and a 1 and a 2. Whereas the typical golfer will tend to rush the transition out of tempo, like and a 1 and a 2, and a 1 and a 2. And so they're a little bit eager to get started because they feel like they have to muscle the ball to get it out there. So they're in more of a rush. They tend to squeeze at the top and try to pull on the handle this way because it feels to them like getting a ball out there for distance is going to take like physical strength and pressure, where a professional golfer will be less rushed in the transition and feel like they're still pretty flippity-floppity, not pulling, but instead starting the downswing with the shifting and turning of the body and letting the arms not be active, but instead reactive. Now moving into the downswing, we also see this similar pattern in amateurs where they dominate the swing, or if they find the majority of their power they're trying to get in the dropping of the arms or pulling through of the arms rather than the shifting and turning of the body with the arms being reactive. So the typical golfer there will swing up, narrow and short, not a lot of wrists, and then try to pull the club through with an absence of weight shift and turn. The big difference here being is that a golfer on the PGA Tour is going to get their power from the shifting the weight to the left side and freely turning the torso through. So typically a golfer on TV at impact, you'll be looking more at his back. Well, the typical golfer who's an amateur will be looking at their side at impact, and you'll still be able to see even their chest at the moment of the strike. Perhaps the biggest difference between a better amateur golfer, let's say somebody who's a 0 to 9 handicap, who's pretty good, between them and somebody like a Justin Rose, for example, probably the biggest difference they're going to see is the maintenance of the posture. So while both golfers might set up with pretty good posture at the beginning, I see a lot of blown postures going through impact where I see the hips move forward or even diagonally in this direction, and to keep the balance so that the weight doesn't go over the toes, the head has to move up and back to match. So you'll end up with a very straight body or a tall body, whereas the typical tour pro is working very hard on keeping the butt back and maintaining the same angle of inclination at the hips throughout the entire impact zone. Now into the follow through, the average golfer tends to cut their finish off from this angle. They tend to stop about here, never completing the turn of the body, never completing the follow through, which we would love to see, end up around the eye line, and at minimum perpendicular to the target line, and at best we'd like to see it even start to turn up the fairway at the end. In other words, get past that point, make a very long wrapped around finish, touching the bone at the base of the neck with the shaft. The difference between these two finishes can sometimes be up to 10 miles per hour in club speed. So putting all these things together, a professional golfer on TV is going to achieve, through technique, much of a very high club head speed, an average of 114 miles per hour right now. But not only that, they're quite distance efficient, so they're getting a high amount of distance out of their effort. They're also using probably less effort because they're so relaxed and moving all the pieces at the right time and the right direction. To me, hitting a 300-yard drive feels like I'm swinging easier than I see some of my students attempting to hit a 220 or 240-yard drive. They really look like they're violent in order to do that. So here would be a really good plan of attack if I was either the average golfer, let's say 16 to 20 handicap, or if I was a better golfer who was a 0 to 9 handicap. I've just presented you with a good 9 or 10 different ways that you might vary from a very good golfer, let's say somebody on TV who's a +5 or a +6 handicap, like a Tiger or a Rory, is first identify how you vary. Is it in your grip or your stance? I would certainly start there. So I would make a small list of 3 to 5 ideas where you differ the greatest. Then what I would do is I would rank them in order of importance. Importance does not necessarily mean it makes you look like you're swinging more like them, but I would go with what makes you function more like a PGA golfer, what gets you a little bit better. So function over form at first. Figure out the 1 or 2 things on that list of 5 that are the most crucial and start chipping away at those every single day, even if it's just 3 to 5 minutes. At first I would do them at home, maybe without even a club. If it's a body movement or it's a stretch, maybe you just need a 9-iron at home. You can practice your grip. You can practice your setup in front of a full-length mirror. That is something you should do every day, because that's what good players do every day while they're developing a PGA Tour swing for the future someday. Knock out your top item, get it at least 70, 80, 90% complete, and then move on to the second item, and then go from there. Once you're done with those 5 things, maybe you can find a few more after that. Hey, thanks so much for watching and tuning into my channel. If you got something out of this video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks a lot again to Golf Development Complex in Moore Park for all their generosity, and hopefully I'll see you soon farther down the fairway.